Some of you are familiar with Fresno State and know that we have a students organization, the Armenian Students Organization, which has been in existence since 1974. I won't date myself, but I was a member of the club many years ago. Today, the students had a very nice event. They held a barbecue, and I believe our president, I know our president of the ASO is here, so I want to introduce maybe the executives that are here just to come up with him. That way, at least they'll be up here too. I just see Karin, I think that's here also. Karin is the secretary, right? So why don't you just come up and just be here with Alec while he's speaking. So I want to introduce Alec. Alec Karayan is the president of the Armenian Students Organization. Alec is an ag business major, and he will be graduating in spring. Karin is a biochemistry major, I knew that. But I also know that she's an Armenian studies minor, and she's been very active, and she also went on the trip with us to Armenia. So I invite Alec to tell us a little bit about their activities and about the ASO.
Thank you, Professor Barlow. So I just want to report back to the community, introduce ourselves. I'm Alec, the president for this year, the 23-24 ASO. This is Karin. She's on the execs along with Armand Karkasian, Simon Zankochian, and Karina Masilian. And I'm pleased to report back to you guys at Fresno State the Armenian spirit is alive and well. We had 50 plus people today at our first event. It was a very good turnout. We handed out over 1,000 flyers on the Artsakh situation on September 21st on Armenian Independence Day, just to get the community at Fresno State to know what's happening and open their eyes. And I think we had a pretty good, successful turnout there, and people were actually reading the flyers, going to our QR code, and reading more on it. So I just want to thank our community for the support, and this year we're looking forward to having a great ASO year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alec and Karin. And that's a very exciting group. There's a really lot of enthusiasm. We have some of our older members, but we have a very new group of freshmen and transfer students who I believe are going to be a really good addition to the club. They do so many things, so thank you again for that. This evening I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Dr. Bedross Der Matossian. Tonight he'll be talking about a new book that he has published, which I'll just show you here. I'm going to turn down the lights in just a moment. It's called Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century. It's a book that he edited, and he'll tell you about that book. I'm not going to tell you anything more about it, but the question of denial is something which is we've been following since the genocide itself. So the genocide itself and denial were born together. So there was already immediate denial from that point. And so he focuses in his book on roles of communication, news media, global and social news networks. Tonight I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Bedross Der Matossian. He's a native of the old city of Jerusalem, where he was raised, but he is now a professor of modern Middle East history at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And he is an author, an editor, co-editor of 7 books. He had a book recently on Adana called The Horrors of Adana, the 1909 massacres, a very important work as well. And again, his latest volume is the edited volume that we're going to be talking about. He is also a colleague of mine in the Society for Armenian Studies. The Society for Armenian Studies is the international body which has composed of all the scholars and teachers who teach in the field or are involved in the field of Armenian studies. And he was the former president, I believe, for 5-6 years, and the institution really grew from maybe 200 members to double that number of members, and a lot of activities for the Society for Armenian Studies. So you talk about what's happening in the world, and we think about political things, but we don't put enough value on the scholarly side, because we have to fight back, right? Or we have to also produce material about our history, about our culture. So it's really important, the work that Bedross does and other scholars in our field, because again, it gives us a sense of who we are. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Bedross Der Matossian.
Thank you, Professor Barlow Gerber-Dichan for again inviting me here, and again, this is my maybe fourth, fifth, or sixth time being in Fresno. It's an honor to be here, and today I'm going to talk about the new volume that I edited. The volume has been in the making for the past 3-4 years, and this is the end result. I didn't choose the cover of the book, the press chose the cover of the book, and without consulting with me, but the end result was excellent, I think. It shows that people are aware about the Armenian genocide. It's the Dizerman compared, yeah? All of you know the image. So, denial is an important aspect of perpetration of violence. When you deny the genocide, denial of genocide emboldens perpetrators to commit more acts of genocide. All right? So, I start the book with a quote. On January 27, 2021, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day in a televised speech in which he condemned racism, hate crime, and the rise of racist nationalism. And I quote, this is what he's saying. The signs of the Holocaust, the Bosnian, Rwandan, and Cambodian genocide, in which millions of people lost their lives, were evident with systematic discrimination, marginalization, and rising hate speech long before these massacres. All these genocides are living examples reminding the international community of its responsibility. It is far beyond being a mere moral attitude that should be adopted by every state, but also contractual obligation under the 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide, end quote. If a person doesn't know about the history of Turkey, they'll say, wow, President Erdogan is really very progressive in his way of viewing other genocides. But one important genocide that was perpetrated by the state, the descendant of which Erdogan is the Armenian genocide. That's missing here. So again, this is a classical case of denial in which the state pretends to be promoting justice, promoting denial, promoting awareness about other genocides, but in fact denies the genocide itself. So, according to Gregory Stanton, who is a genocide scholar, and he actually prepared a 10-stage diagram as to when denial of genocide becomes a denial of genocide. He says there are 10 stages of genocide. The first stage here is classification. The difference between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. So these 10 stages applies on all genocides of the 20th century. Second, symbolization. This is a visual manifestation of hatred. Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe were forced to wear the yellow Star of David. In Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge forced people from Eastern Zone to wear blue scarves. From 1992, in northwest Bosnia, all non-Serbian citizens were forced to wear white armbands. Third stage is discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. In 1955, Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of their German citizenship, made it illegal for them to do many jobs and to marry German non-Jews. Fourth stage is dehumanization. Those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. In Rwandan genocide, for example, the Hutu regime started identifying the Tutsis as Inyenzi, cockroaches. The same way that Rashid Pasha, who was the governor of Diyarbakir, called Armenians as microbes that needs to be eliminated. The fifth stage is organization. Genocides are always planned. Genocides do not happen haphazardly in a situation of chaos. Regimes of hatred often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of people. The Sudanese government supports and arms, for example, the militia called Janjaweed. The sixth stage is polarization. Propaganda begins to be spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper, Der Stromer, to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people. They used the medium of newspaper and radio and TV even. Stage 7 is preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms such as the Nazi phrase, the final solution, to cloak their intentions. All genocide use euphemism. In the Armenian case, the Armenian question had to be solved. All right, so solved. Take care of the group. Make sure that the group does not arrive to its destination. Euphemism is an important aspect of genocide. Stage 8, persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. People are sometimes segregated into ghettos, deported or starved, and property is often expropriated. Genocidal massacres begin. Stage 9 is the extermination stage. The hate group murders their identified victims in a deliberate and systematic campaign of violence, and millions have died in the course of this perpetration, extermination. The last stage is denial. As long as there is denial, I argue, the genocide continues. As long as there is denial of genocides, genocides continue. The perpetrators of later generations deny the existence of any crime. Evidence is destroyed, and witnesses are intimidated. There has been an increase in Holocaust denial online in recent years. But is denial the last stage? I disagree with Gregory Stanton's take on the 10 stages, that the last stage is denial. I think the first stage should be denial too, because denial starts from the first stage. When the perpetrators start committing the genocide or planning the genocide, it also starts with denying the genocide. And here I bring a quote from Tali Sujian, who has an article in the book. She says, the decision to deny a genocide is embedded in the decision to carry it out. Again, the decision to deny a genocide is embedded in the decision to carry it out. In the 1915, for example, during the Armenian genocide, the Ottoman government denied that it was carrying out the genocide. So denial is both the first step and the last step. The first stage and the last stage. As long as genocide is being denied, their genocide continues to be perpetrated. So what is denial of genocide? I have my own definition of what genocide denial is. Not first, but I have to stand here. So I argue that denial is not only the reluctance to acknowledge the historical injustices of the past, but it further aims at killing the dead and their memory over and over, inflicting pain on the survivors and their descendants, and demonstrating that future acts of violence are possible in a climate of deception and impunity. So the really difficult term here is killing the dead. How can you kill a dead person when the dead person has been killed? So killing the dead is above physical destruction. Killing the dead is killing the body, the soul, the memory, the existence of that person from the world. Denialists become ideological. By denying genocide, states and non-state actors become complicit in the process of genocide, transmuting the violence from the physical to the psychological plane. Denialists become ideological as well as biological descendants of the perpetrator. They continue the process of genocide through print and audiovisual media, the desecration of genocide monuments, and the exertion of pressure on different governments in order to prevent the use of the forbidden word, genocide. This is my own definition of what genocide is. This book is not about genocide denial in the 20th century. It's about genocide denial in the 21st century. 21st century has advanced in terms of technology. Denialist discourses have advanced by using, exploiting social media, manipulating social media, and they're able to reach a wider audience in spreading their message, in putting doubt in the minds of people, through arguing under the cloud of legitimate academic discourse, and through using multimedia in order to demonstrate their agenda. So to that extent, it's an art. Denial of genocide is an art. And the art of genocide denial has also evolved and adapted to keep pace, developing new strategies to augment and complement established modes of denial. So the denial that we have today is no more the denial of the 20th century, of the beginning of the 1920s or 30s or 40s. It's become more sophisticated. It encompasses a range of techniques, including disputes over numbers, contestation of legal and sociological definitions, blaming the victim, cover-ups, and various modes of intimidation, including threats of legal action. But the most effective strategy is the purposeful creation of misinformation by benefiting from the vast changes of technology and methods of communication in the 21st century. In the 1990s, 1980s, there weren't any social network. Twitter, Facebook, name it. It didn't exist. So it was more difficult to spread denialism through these networks. I'm not talking about Armenian genocide only, looking all types of denials of genocides in the 21st century. As I said, the rapid growth of the internet and social media has created new opportunities for fomenters of denial and new challenges for those scholars to contain it. How do you contain genocide denial where it's spreading extremely fast? And instead of now printing a paper and going to a conference and showing that denying the genocide, you're now just a click send, just one click, send to all members, all students at the university, saying that this event is part of is fabrication. Denialist literature has also taken the outward appearance of legitimate scholarship, seeking to give the impression of rationality and evidence-based research. Now, once you have kind of quote-unquote legitimate scholars or self-acclaimed historians or scholars, they are able to enter into mainstream publishing and start expressing their points of view by putting the act of genocide under suspicion and representing it from a both-sidism perspective. Well, Armenians say this, Jews say that, Cambodians say this, Tutsis say that, and let's look at the other side too, you know. This idea of other-sidism or both-sidism creates a very problematic way of approaching, and some are successful in doing that by using very deceiving academic language under the cloud of academic discourse. Undermining scholarship and legitimate research by fomenting, as I said, widespread skepticism of any mainstream source of information. Deniers of genocide are not confined to a small group. That's what I found. Identifying themselves as revisionists, but compose strong movement infused with racism, bigotry against the victim group. This bigotry is manifested in anti-Semitism, which is in rise today in this country, anti-Armenianism, which is rise in different countries, such as Azerbaijan, Turkey, and many other, Pakistan, and many other neighboring countries who are allied with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Another important aspect that we see happening is the rise of right-wing governments, populist governments around the globe, from Poland to Hungary and many other places. Think about Hungary, for example. In Hungary, there was a famous European Central University, which was kicked out by Orban himself, because George Soros was behind the Central European University. So I'm going to present the chapters of the book. So there was a very good review of the book a few days ago, and the reviewer actually said he could have devoted more time to other scholars, other genocides, denial of genocide, than concentrating on only 3 chapters devoting to the Armenian genocide. Now, why I devoted 3 chapters to the Armenian genocide, it's not that because I'm Armenian, it's because the Armenian genocide and its denial is the most sophisticated denial of any genocide in the course of the 20th and 21st century. A whole state apparatus, the Turkish state, with its own umbrella foreign ministry, ambassadors, consulates, student associations, cultural organizations are involved in denying the Armenian genocide, protesting universities, sending messages of intimidation to scholars in order to intimidate them, non-Armenian scholars, in order to intimidate them to not be involved in any activity dealing with Armenian genocide. The Turkish government spends millions of dollars, and did spend here in the United States, in order to prevent the Congress or the President to recognize the Armenian genocide. But it didn't. At the end of the day, it took 30, 40 years, where all the lobbying did not work. And there's a geopolitical dimension to that too. So Armenian genocide is the most, it's obvious. It's the most, there's a state policy, the state is behind it in order to deny the Armenian genocide. That's why I devoted 3 chapters to the Armenian genocide. The first chapter is Denial of Genocide of Indigenous People in the United States by Robert Hitchcock. He argues the way in which the United States plays an important role in denying the genocide of indigenous people that happened throughout a few centuries. And he argues that the denial of the indigenous genocide has contributed to the deterioration of their own situation, of the situation of the indigenous people in this country. So one thing we have to also understand, that denial does not only happen under authoritarian regimes. Denial of genocide happens under democratic regimes. It's only lately that we see settler colonial states like United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia have taken certain steps in order to remedy the situation. Canada has been more progressive than Australia, but the only country that's lagging behind is the United States. There hasn't been any official apology by the United States government for the multiple phases of genocide that has been perpetrated against the indigenous population. The second article is by Talin Suja, an Ottomanist. She argues, her title is Armenian Genocide and its Denial, a comprehensive tool of supremacism. She discusses the way in which scholars, under the title of postcolonialism, deny the Armenian genocide by defending anti-colonialism and the way in which the Turkish or the Ottoman Empire struggled, fought a war against imperial powers, the British and the French, and the Russians, of course, to save its empire and preserve the territorial integrity of the empire. And you have discourse here that some people say, yes, it was a genocide, but we have to also think about the other dimension. It happened, imperial powers, etc. There's these justifications. The genocide should never be justified. There's no justification of genocide. Third is by Mark Mamigonian, Weaponizing the First Amendment, Denial of the Armenian Genocide in the US courts. This is an important article too, because it discusses the way that the Turkish groups within the United States have resorted to legal action in order to present a counter view of genocide, of the genocide, which is called contra-genocide. So they filed lawsuits against the Massachusetts Board of Education, against University of Minnesota, and the third one, in order to bring the discourse, the debate about genocide into the law, into the court, into the law, into the court actually. And the court, always, United States, they would defend what? Freedom of speech. United States is a place that you can deny anything. You can deny genocide, you can deny Holocaust under the title of the First Amendment, freedom of speech. So by doing so, you have to now start defending yourself and go to court. The amount of money that you're spending on the court, and it leads to what? It leads to the fact now. It leads to the fact that Armenian genocide is debatable. You know, there are both sides in the court. It's a contra-genocide argument, and there's then a genocide argument. They said, well, if you're saying it's a genocide, then you have to present our point of view. Against the Minnesota case, for example, University of Minnesota, the Holocaust Center on its website had the Armenian genocide, and they wanted it to put the alternative view of the Armenian. How can you do that? You know. The fourth one is by Eldad Ben Aharon, deals with the denial of the Armenian genocide in Israel. Yeah? And Israel always have played the Armenian genocide card as a token with its relationship with Turkey. Whenever the relationship goes south, you see suddenly the bill comes up and Turkey gets nervous, and then they sit on the table and finish it. I'm going to discuss also the Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, and the ramification of Artsakh today as we're speaking. Actually, ethnic cleansing is taking place. So what Eldad Ben Aharon argues that, despite the fact that many MPs in Israel wanted to advance a bill recognizing the Armenian genocide, he argues that the political structure within the Knesset, the parliament, Israeli parliament, is in such a way that always the executive has a power to abort passing of any bill. And now that Netanyahu, for example, wants to control the judiciary, it raised a major issue within the Israeli society. That's why you see every weekend there are 100,000 people demonstrating in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and other places in order to prevent that to happen. The fifth chapter is by my colleague in the department, Jared Steinacher, prominent scholar of the Holocaust. His article is entitled Denying the Shoah, Distorting History in the 21st Century, and he shows how genocide, how the Holocaust is being denied in the United States. Starting with his article with the January 6th riots in DC, where anti-Semitism was on its height. And he shows that how this rise of right-wing movement, the QAnons, the Proud Boys, what?
Proud, yeah.
Proud or Pride? Proud.
Yeah.
Proud Boys. And other right-wing movements has also led to a new phase of denial of the Holocaust in the United States. Then we go to Cambodia by prominent scholar Ben Kiernan, who shows how the denial of the Cambodian genocide have enabled the perpetration of a second genocide in Cambodia in 1992-93. Cambodian genocide took place in 1975 to 1979, and it shows that the denial of that genocide, both in the international community, has contributed to the happening of the second genocide. And how until the trial of the leaders of the Khmer Rouge in 2004, the genocide was being denied not only by the opposition, but also by scholars around the globe. Then we have the denial of the Guatemalan genocide. Guatemalan genocide took place in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, 1984. by the government of Ephraim Mont, who initiated the genocide against the Mayan population in Guatemala, with the fear that they were going, with the fear that eventually communism was going to come into Guatemala. It's a classical case of genocide, but it's being denied, not only by the Guatemalan government, but many other places. I mean, when the genocide was taking place, the United States was backing Ephraim Mont's government because of the fear that Marxists are going to come into power. The evangelical church here in the United States was denying also the genocide because it was backing the government. Bosnian genocide is another genocide that took place in the 90s. You remember with the massacre of Srebrenica. And Jelena Sabotić here also discusses the denial of the Bosnian genocide and how it plays an important role in creating the Serbian identity, in maintaining the identity of the Republika Srpska. Republika Srpska is an entity within Bosnia and Herzegovina that has autonomy. No one recognizes the republic. The European community recognizes it and the United States, but no one else recognizes the republic. But the denial of the genocide plays an important role in maintaining that republic. The 9th article is by mainstreaming the denial of the genocide against the Tutsis, and here Moreland specifically concentrates on one book by Judy Revere called the book is about the atrocities that have been committed by the Rwandan Popular Front. Rwandan Popular Front, which was the opposition in Rwanda, and they did commit some crimes, but she again uses the both sidism here. They committed crimes, we committed crimes, etc. What was troubling about this book, that it was published by Penguin Press. And as you know, Penguin is a very reputable publishing house. So again, this is kind of entering the mainstream and representing an argument that people will read and say, maybe she's right. Maybe 800,000 Tutsis were not killed in a period of 3 months, because the Rwandan genocide is the fastest genocide in the course of history and most brutal one, because the killing tool was machete. In a period of 3 months, 800,000 people were killed. Last but not least is Ungur's and Ansar Shahdut's article, which discusses the denial of the genocide that the Assad regime in Syria has perpetrated against his own population, and the way in which social media, YouTube, other networks were used in order to create doubt, in order to obfuscate facts, in order to create the understanding that we're battling against terrorists, as Aliyev said with his latest aggression. It was the terror campaign against terrorism, he said, in Artsakh. The last but not the epilogue has been written by Israel Charney. If you know Israel Charney, he's one of the foremost scholars of genocide from a psychological perspective. He's a psychiatrist. He's been vocal about the Armenian genocide. He was one of the organizers of the 1982 conference that happened actually in Tel Aviv. And that conference is a turning point because the Turkish government in 1982 tried to cancel by using the card that either you cancel this conference or we can't guarantee the safety of the Jews in Turkey. All right? That's very important to understand. So he's a psychiatrist specifically dealing with the trauma of genocide. And what does he say? This is one of the questions he raises. What are the psychological meanings and the benefits of deniers who face survivors of the targeted victim? The obvious answer is that genocide denial is a powerfully satisfying further wishes to supreme and mock, terrorize, and kill others. The question is, why would people deny the genocide? Why perpetrators and their descendants keep denying genocide? As a practicing psychologist for many years, with all my respect and love for human beings and life, I have come to a definite conclusion that these impulsors are and always have been built in or instinctive components of our original basic construction. That the life's challenge is to overcome, and we channel these impulses towards their surprisingly constructive potential for being strong but decent. He says that denial is a natural instinct. Then he says genocide denial is not only a strategy against legal consequences, because once you accept that genocide has taken place, next would be reparation, restitution. And not only pride of the membership in the perpetrator group, it also is a powerful protective mechanism on deeper emotional levels to help people, individuals and people collective, stave off moral qualm, shame, guilt, or responsibility for making amends. Genocide denial helps people to be able to sleep when they have behaved abnormally. End quote. What are the most common discourses of genocide denial? And these discourses have transformed over the decades, but still are very valid in places around the globe that pertains to all genocide. First, hardly anybody died. Show me the numbers. Second, it was self-defense. All right, we were just doing self-defense. Third, the violence was mutual. They killed, we killed, everybody killed each other. You know, it's like it was a civil war. Fourth, the deaths weren't intentional. You know, they were marching to the Syrian desert with heat, sun. You know, they died. It wasn't intentional because the UN Convention of Genocide that was passed in 1948 and was enforced in 1950 or 51. It uses intent as the most important aspect of defining the genocide as a genocide. And how can you prove intent? That's a very problematic aspect because perpetrators do not keep records of their orders. You're going to kill 50 people, you don't write, you know, on your diary, in your diary, tomorrow I'm going to kill 50 people, and so people can read. Perpetrators do not keep records. The orders for the Armenian genocide were not sent through telegraph, or maybe they did because the CUP burned all the documents. But as we know from different accounts, they were sent by commissaries orally. The orders were given orally. There was no central direction, meaning it was a chaotic situation, everyone was out of control, we couldn't control everyone, it was war, happened in different parts of the thing. There weren't that many people to begin with. How are you saying 6 million Jews were killed, 1.5 million Armenians were killed? You know, 8,000 Serbians were massacred, were a part of a genocide. 7, it wasn't genocide because the victims were not, this is the most hilarious one, it's not a genocide because the victims were not part of the UN Convention, were not members of the Convention. Convention specified groups, because the Convention itself is extremely problematic. UN Convention is extremely problematic. It's a very narrow definition of what genocide is. There's an intent there. It's very difficult to prove intent. I have my way of understanding what intent is. But the groups, it specifies, but removes from it indigenous people, removes from it political people, and that was a compromise by the Soviet Union and the United States. For the United States, they removed the indigenous people for the genocides that happened here. And for the Soviet Union, they removed the political groups because of Stalin's genocides against his own population. As you know, the Armenian intellectuals in the 20th century suffered 2 kinds of genocides. One of them is the Armenian genocide. The second one is Stalin genocide, where a lot of Armenian intellectuals were killed, including Zabel Yesaya and many others. We would never do it. We would never do that. And that was the title of my talk. It never happened, because we will never do that. We are the real victims as part of this large imperial conspiracy. As we're talking now, actually, I would like to talk a bit about the situation in Artsakh, because I'm sure in the course of history, the denial of what's happening in Artsakh today, which was genocide by attrition, whenever you deny people from food for 9 months, that's a classic case of genocide by attrition. The definition of genocide by attrition is that you are creating the condition in which these people are going to die. All right? For example, if you send people to, what's the biggest desert in the United States? Anyone?
Mojave Desert.
Barefooted to the Mojave Desert and ask them to walk under 120 degrees, and they all die on the way. That's genocide by attrition. What we see today is a clear-cut genocide and ethnic cleansing. So, all of you know what's happened here. You know, even the Armenians went to the International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice ruled that Azerbaijan to take all measures at its disposal to ensure unimpeded movement of persons, vehicle, and cargo along the lodging corridor in both directions. What happened? Nothing. Because Azerbaijan is a despotic regime backed by both Turkey and Russia, was able to commit this crime against humanity. In televised speech on 18 April 2023, last April meeting, President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan said, and I quote, it's ironic, Armenians living in Karabakh should either accept Azerbaijani citizenship or find another place to live. There is complete freedom in that. All democratic fundamentals have been offered. This issue should be resolved on the basis of human rights. And now, a propaganda campaign has started in which to present the argument, which is a classic case of denial, of we told them they can't stay, but they left. Because 40 years ago, when you go to Eastern Turkey, Western Armenia, ask a local villager, what happened to the Armenians? What's the answer? They left. The same argument we're going to see developing now by Azerbaijani scholars, by the state, by the government. But remember that from the beginning, 2020 war, until the last 3 weeks, international media was not interested, was in denial in what was happening in Artsakh. It was only 3 weeks ago they suddenly woke up and saw that a disaster is coming. And what's the use of all the coverage today, as you can see by all the newspapers? As of today, 97,000 Armenians from Artsakh were forcibly displaced from Artsakh and went to Armenia. Forcefully displaced. It's a classical case of ethnic cleansing. You create the condition that you can stay here, you know, I will guarantee your human rights. But Azerbaijan does not guarantee its own citizens' human rights. There are hundreds of political activists, intellectuals who are in the jail for their freedom of speech. It's not a democratic country. How do you guarantee the safety of your own population where your soldiers are wearing a badge, Azerbaijani soldiers are wearing a badge on their arm which says don't escape Armenian, don't escape. You will die of exhaustion. And whose picture is on the badge? Enver Pasha, one of the architects of the Armenian genocide. So how Armenians are supposed to live under a despotic regime, a regime that has for 30 years propagated hatred against Armenians, with Armenophobia. The whole state is based on Armenophobia, if you think about it. Because a despotic regime needs a scapegoat in order to survive. Aliyev is a despotic regime, he's a despot. So he uses Qarabakh in order to, Artsakh, in order to strengthen his regime within the country. And now he's a hero, because he's able to quote-unquote liberate Artsakh. But again, we're going to see that this would be a part of a future, or again, denial happens. Denial is not the last stage, it's the first stage. Denial happens as the ethnic cleansing and the genocide is happening. But that's a very important aspect of understanding the situation. I'm going to stop here, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you very much. Yes, Barbara.